welcome to a live episode of Control Alt Access. This means it's been a year.
It's been a year.
We've been doing this for a year now.
It's like the OG fans of the show will know that this is the second time we're doing live.
Yeah, our first live episode was Conf 2024, and it's now Conf 2025, the one time a year that we're in the same physical location. And we've just finished day one of the conference.
Yes, we have.
How are you feeling about day one?
I talked to Cyclist Combat earlier, and he said something brilliant. He said, like, my brain isn't even going brrr anymore. It's just microwave. Me. I am so stuffed with information, but this is positively. I'm meaning it in the best positive way. Going here every single year, it's like meeting people. For the first time, I'm feeling like I'm back home.
Yeah.
Yes. Like when I met people yesterday, I flew in yesterday and we were like going for a drink in the evening, and I'm just like, oh, I'm home.
Yes, it's people that just sort of get what our whole thing is.
Yes.
You know, we don't have to explain it, everyone gets it here.
Yes. Like we talked about accessibility yesterday, and somebody needed to leave, so we had to like say the usual goodbye and stuff like that, and then Carrie ended up turning around and going, anyways, back to accessibility. And I'm just like, yes, I'm with my people and people who understands.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So should we talk about what happened in day one of Conf as
Yes.
best we can?
Yeah, we shall do that.
So the day opened as it usually does with Tara Volker doing introductions. Most of the stuff in there is just like general stuff for being at the venue. One thing I will say about like the setup for this year, masks were not mandatory, but they did do mandatory COVID testing,
Yes.
and they did catch someone with COVID before they made it to the venue, so hooray for mandatory COVID testing.
Yes, that's a really, really good thing. I also did enjoy that today, or this year, we have 2 quiet rooms. So if you need any time during the conference,
yeah.
my brain is fried, to go and sit down, have a lay down, there is possibilities for that, and that is so important. I always do that every single year. I do it for the panel talk. Yeah, we will talk a bit more about it later, but like I think that is really good. And it was also information about if you have hearing aid, and I think in English you say loop in.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so that's what you say in English. They have section which is like lined off, that is like if you're in here, you can loop in.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really good.
Indeed. And then we went on to Ian Hamilton doing the news recap of the last 6 months, and not to toot our own horn, the thing that I was really excited about was basically everything in that recap was stuff we talked about on Control Alt Access, which is a good sign of like, okay, we didn't miss any major accessibility stuff.
And both of us got named.
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
We both got to feel very fancy.
Yeah, I felt like, oh, I've been named.
One of the things I did think was interesting in that news section was in the USA Conf that's happening in about 6 months, there's going to be a talk about the accessibility store tags system that the all those publishers came together and did.
Yes.
And that the GDC talk about that is going to be made publicly available on the 16th of April, which I'm glad that people are going to get to see that talk properly.
Yes.
Let's jump into the talks. Where do we want to start? First one of the day?
Yeah, let's just start on top and going down. Yeah, what we normally do.
Yeah, so first talk of the day was Sierra Leishman from Hyperluminal Games, the studio you might know from Pine Hearts that we talked about a while ago on the show, talking about sustainable approaches to accessibility in indie development.
Yes.
Where do we want to start on this one?
I really enjoyed it because they talked about everything good they did with Pine Hearts and how can they now take that and move it over to other games.
Yeah, so a big part of this was talking about when they were designing Pine Hearts, designing their accessibility tools to be something that they could port to other Unity projects, that they could reuse as much of that work as possible.
And sort of that have seemed to be like a red thread going through the whole day. A lot of people, we have come now to a place where accessibility is something you are not doing for the first time.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is really cool because that also opened doors for a lot of new opportunities, but also new problems. Because especially when a game is quite different and is quite new, you will have new problems you haven't seen before. But having this like sort of library or toolkit to sort of work from gives you the opportunity to go like, hey, we don't need to do this. We don't need to like start and make the invent the wheel again.
Yeah.
But we need to a lot of times just like sort of we need still to go in and see if it still works the way it worked the first time. Yeah.
And a big part of that talk I thought was really interesting was talking about the fact that the scope of what you do with accessibility might change depending on what kind of project you're working on, and that being okay. The example they gave is that Hyperluminal Games does a lot of work as like a co-development studio on other people's projects. And the example they gave here was a game called The Day I Became a Bird. Because that was a co-developed project that like they were having to do a lot of the funding on themselves, they went, okay, there's not a lot of budget here for innovating new features. How can we streamline taking what we did on Pine Hearts and bringing it over to this project?
Yeah.
Whereas their other one, Cloud Jumper, that is like a new IP that they're like, it's their new big project of their own. There they've got more room to go. What's new features we can innovate on, and we can do that innovation over here because this is just our project.
Yes. And I also think it was really cool that they showed what they had a showcase where they ended up like wanting to make part of the showcase accessible. And what was really cool with that was that not only did they be able to showcase their game for disabled gamers, but they had said that they started to inspire other devs, other studios to do the same. Like other developers came over to them and went like, hey, this is really, really cool. Can we also do this?
Yeah, the example of this was they were showing the game at EGX and WASD, and they brought along accessible hardware setups, and other developers were like, ooh, could we do this for our game, make it more playable for disabled people at these events? Can we come learn from you?
Yes, and it also made them so inspired that they decided to have an actual dedicated accessibility day at their studio where they got in disabled gamers to test their game, and they took them to lunch and they showcased their whole like studio, and like they made a day out of it. So inspired, again inspired, again inspired, again inspired. And I thought that was a really nice way to start the day.
It was a really nice optimistic start.
Yes, it was.
From there we went to John Dickens from Tencent with a talk called Include, Learn, Iterate, Research for Accessibility. And a lot of this one was talking about like fundamentally what is user research and what should it be and what does it need to be in the context of accessibility.
Yes.
This started with like you've got to do user research like at all various points in the project, at the concept stage, when you've got a vertical slice, when you've got an alpha build, after you've released, and you're basically just trying to understand why players aren't playing your game the way that you expected them to.
Yes, and to be honest, this talk was just like a bunch of, I've almost only have like a lot of good like quotes like learning rather than leading.
Yes,
I thought that was really good because a lot of us cannot be in the forefront, and that is okay. You can also just learn. Like, it doesn't need to be innovating, it doesn't need to be new, it doesn't need to be anything that is like the oh wow and wonders. It just needs to be, hey, we're going to this time learn.
It is okay for your position to be, I see other people are doing great things, we'll try and do them too.
Yeah, like, and you can also go like, this time I only want to learn this one simple thing, and that is my focus, and that is okay.
Yeah.
And I thought it was cool that he talked a lot about like nothing about you, about us, without us, which is the typical quote we have seen a billion times before. But it is important to remember it. Like, if you're going to do games that are accessible, you need to talk to people that knows how you actually use accessibility.
Yeah, a great example of that was they put controller remapping in their game, thinking, oh, this will be great for one-handed play. And then they gave it to the game to a one-handed playtester, who half the game they were doing one-handed, and half of it they were doing one-handed and also using their mouth.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, I'd love an ability to swap between two profiles with one button press to go between these two control schemes I need. a thing that wouldn't have come up if you hadn't playtested. Also, I really like that they talked about, and this is important to us, don't put your game in front of accessibility consultants before you've tried thinking about accessibility and prototyping things and gotten to a point where consultants actually can give you useful feedback.
Yes, or no, actually a bit correction on that one.
Okay.
What they said was, don't put it in front of playtesters.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yes.
I took this in the context of consultants because, like, this happens with us.
Yes. Because what they said was just like, you can actually start accessibility playtesting too early.
Yeah.
There is no need to do that before you actually have something. But he said you can have consultants in to start the idea of accessibility.
Yeah.
But then you need to approach it from the way of like, hey, this is early.
Yeah, because it's the context of, if what you're asking for is, here is a build, sit down and play it, knowing that it's inaccessible, the only feedback you're going to get is, it wasn't accessible.
Yeah, you're doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
And nobody is going to want to continue doing the work if they just, the only thing they hear is wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can have those kind of, like, conversations about directions to go, but if you're going to do, like, playtest style feedback, you need to at least try putting some things in so people have something to give feedback on.
Yeah.
Other things, this was pointed out at GA Conf last year, but I think it's great. Lots of user research avoids, for example, unemployed people, people who don't have valid photo ID. If you apply those to accessibility playtesting, that will limit really heavily who can take part in accessibility playtesting. Be really aware of that. Be willing to change those standards for accessibility.
Yes.
Things like do remote playtesting for accessibility stuff. And not being able to reach perfection isn't a reason not to try adding things in.
And I had a brilliant quote in the Discord server, because keep in mind, GA Conf is always able to join it for free online.
Yeah.
So if you want to do that, do that, and then you can talk to people on their dedicated Discord. And I had a brilliant quote going: "Nothing is 0% accessible, and nothing is 100% accessible." And if you are a avid listener to this to this podcast, you have heard me said it a million times before. But I do really absolutely stand by it, and it looks like other people also stand by that quote. So yeah.
Agreed. So this is the one that I'll talk about this one, because you took a break during this.
Yes. But I really want to quickly say about
that.
Go
ahead.
I always take a break during the panels. The reason for that is because I cannot concentrate in a room with a lot of people, also concentrate about 4 people talking at the same time. I cannot do that. And that's okay. And the reason why I want to actually say that is it doesn't have anything to do with the people there. And the talk, I always know it is going to be wonderful, because I always go back and listen to it later, but I just can't do it. And that's okay. If you come to this event and there is some things that you cannot join, just don't.
Yeah, no one's going to make a point of it. Everyone understands.
Yes, and they have the quiet room, and they have different rooms where you can end up like going and staying when other talks are happening. It's okay for you to go out, take a break, talk to people. You will always find somebody who cannot join everything, and it is okay, and I think that is important.
Yeah. So very quickly, this panel involved Amy Kavanagh, the Wobbly Gamer, Radders, and Melody Powell, basically talking about generally being advocates for accessibility in the games industry and some of the challenges and positives that come from that. Some very quick highlights. Looking for support for your own disabilities can often end up being a path to becoming the support others will end up seeking. That's how a lot of us end up getting into this, is I'm looking for support for the things I need help with, and eventually, oh no, now I'm the person that knows the things that can support other people.
Yes.
The joy of hearing, having your voice be heard and it being helpful, and, you know, as someone doing this kind of work, having someone come and tell you, thank you for doing what you do, it helped me play more games, is a really wonderful thing, and sort of encouraging. If someone has helped you get into accessible games, let them know that it helped. It really makes a lot of this work feel worthwhile. Radders told a story about TwitchCon and there was a year in which she went to give a talk and there was no ramp for the stage.
Yep.
And after sort of making a point of how much of a problem that was, the following year someone ran up to her before her panel and went, "It is because of you that every stage at TwitchCon this year has ramps now."
Yes.
And it's like, wonderful. It's nice to see that impact being made. A lot of it was just sharing really positive stories of, like, little moments where people got to have wins of, like, you advocating, you got to be told directly that helped in some way.
Yes.
A really lovely one, Amy Kavanagh talked about asking on social media for an audio-described version of future Assassin's Creed trailers, and then when the first audio-described Assassin's Creed trailer released, she got a DM simply saying, "This is for you," and a link to the trailer. And, like, those little moments of getting to feel like, oh, I don't have to question whether I did or not. I know for a fact I got a win here.
That's lovely. And the fun thing is that I didn't even like listen to this talk, and I will do it later, but I couldn't do it right now. And then I got tagged in the Discord a bunch of times because people were like, Arabia got mentioned.
Yeah.
And I got mentioned in this panel by the Wobbly Gamer of, like, you sometimes can do positive changes, and it's good to see other people talk about their wins and talk about the progress and talking about it because it inspires other people.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that came up that I think is important to talk about is unpaid advocacy is a privilege to a degree that, like, particularly Amy Kavanagh talked a lot about, like, being a parent with a young child and not having the luxury of being able to do that kind of unpaid work as frequently, and, like, the barrier that poses to advocacy.
Yes.
Which I think is an important conversation.
Yeah. And we'll have that in the next talk as well.
Yes. But generally, really good panel, well worth checking out. And as we've said before, if you didn't watch them live, all of these talks will end up on the GA Conf YouTube channel.
Yeah, and a note on that, which is really, really important, most of the talks will be cut up into actual, like, YouTube videos, but not all of them. So if you cannot find it as a dedicated YouTube video, go to the live.
Yeah.
But that's on a different
tab.
Tab. Thank you. That's what the name is in English. There's a different tab for previous live recordings.
Yeah, and you can watch the whole day as like a single video.
Yes, and you need to go in there if there's something that didn't got a dedicated video about it. You can still find it in the live tab. Yes.
Yeah. So with that, should we move on to the next one? Selling Progress, the Accessibility Champion Survival Pack 2025.
Yes. So, there was some controversial things about this talk.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about that because, first and foremost, who had this talk, Laura?
Ame F. Chiazon from Player Research. Talking about surviving as an accessibility advocate.
Yes.
And the thing that was the first thing that came up about this talk was the night before the talk, Ame had decided to reformat it to be about tarot, fictional tarot cards, and had decided to use AI-generated art of the tarot cards as illustrations in the talk.
Yes, and on a positive note, she was really upfront about it. She said these images are AI-generated, and she also actually ended up being like...
she labelled them, yeah.
Thank you. I'm so tired.
That's all right. As a team, we've got this.
We got it. She labelled them to be AI-generated, but it started a discourse in the Discord, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah. AI generating and I've said this before, you cannot play a modern game today, maybe indie games, but you cannot play at AA, AAA without, your game will have had some kind of AI. AI is not equal bad.
Yeah, we are specifically talking generative AI,
yes. Generative AI in many cases, if not most cases, are bad. Yeah. Because it is based on other people's work.
Yeah, it is based on stolen work that was not credited. It uses a lot of environmental damage and stuff to produce. Yes. And I will say for this, I recognise what you're saying in terms of it's good that it was acknowledged up front, and I don't deny that.
Yep.
I will also... I think it's fair to say acknowledging that you've done a thing that's not good, but doing it anyway doesn't undo that you still if anything, you did the thing and knew it wasn't good and did it anyway, which is I think it is fair to be critical of.
And like, I think it's fair. Like, it started the discourse that needed to be had, but they did ask, like, hey, can we continue going forward?
Yeah.
People respected that, and I think that was really good. But she ended up like writing in the Discord like, hey, I felt bad about this. I understand why people are critical. I have actually now, because she's really good at like drawing and she's really good at designing. So she went like, hey, I have now made all of the pictures into actual pictures that I have made, and I have put that into my talk. So if I ever use this talk again, they will actually be from pictures I myself have drawn. So she did like fix it. Yes, so I just wanted to let that people know that she did fix it, and she talked about it in the Discord. But let's talk about the actual talk.
Yeah, so the overall talk was basically the kind of things that are important for like grounding yourself and surviving doing work that's sometimes a bit thankless. So things like doing breathing exercises to sort of ground yourself, finding the places where maybe you need to reword what you're doing in ways that will survive and be heard in the ways that corporate people will actually listen to.
And this is a hard topic.
Yeah.
Because it's a fine line. You talked a bit about it, we talked about it, about the talk afterward. It's a fine line of like, when does advocacy need to lie a bit low? And when does advocacy need to actually be heard? And Amy said a really, really good thing about like whenever she goes into a room. So Amy has a visible disability because she is blind and she uses a guide dog. No matter where she goes, she will always be clocked as disabled. I, on the other hand, never have that problem because my disabilities are always invisible. Oh, no. They're not always invisible. No.
But I know, we know what you
times,
mean.
Most times,
you're not walking around with a guide dog.
No, but most times they are invisible. And is it then okay to go, hey, I need to be invisible now because then I will be heard in the long run? And I think it was like, I think it started the talk. Let's just say that. And it's a talk that we need to have. But sometimes we actually need to go, hey, I need to eat food. And this company might not be accessible, and it might not be good, and it might not do good things, but I need food. And I need to have food on the table and pay rent, and that is okay. And yes, we need to have these conversations. But in the end, we also need to eat, and we need to be able to have that in between.
This was the talk of the day that I think brought out the most complicated conversations, and I think like that is a credit to the talk. Like, whether you agree or disagree with its overall takes and the way it was presented, it definitely generated really useful conversation. Like, we definitely talked about things like where the line is between, like, as you're saying, like, you know, sometimes needing to stay under the radar to get paid and get work done, versus like the fact that like when you work in accessibility, there are legal requirements that companies be a degree accessible, and how much you may or may not feel you have an obligation to use that to get other kinds of diversity and equality conversations started, because they can't kick you out the room as easily as they can other areas of diversity. It was there is nuanced conversations to be had that this talk was a really good springboard for.
And it's also really important for us. We're two women that are really strong-headed. We do not sit down, and we are so often willing to put our hands on the line and put like, we are willing to get our hands chopped off to get our things heard. That is not reality. And that's not also the, like, in the day and age we're living in right now, that is also maybe not actually possible for a lot of people. And I think that is a topic we need to talk about. I am, to be honest, too tired and too like to be able to talk about it in a nuanced way today. But I think I want to come back to this talk one day, because I think it is important. So maybe on another episode we can have an actual really good, like we do a recording in the morning when both of us are like rested and well, like ready, and maybe we can have a really good talk about this.
This feels like one to put in the back pocket for if there's ever a quiet week where we don't have much to talk about.
Yes.
And we, as you say, we're both able to record in the morning when we're feeling awake, which used to be our recording slot.
Yes.
And like really dive into it. I would love to have... You're a person I feel safe having that complicated, nuanced conversation with. Today's not the day for it.
Because I think, like, I go through society quite easily. You not necessarily don't do that. Not in the same way, no. So, and I think especially also how we are perceived online is two completely different conversations. And I think we should have that conversation. Yeah. Because we both have things to learn from each other. But today is not.
Yeah. Anyway, talk about surviving as an accessibility advocate that spiraled into some like very different conversations.
Yeah, and very deep conversations.
Yeah.
Okay.
So next up we had Chroma, a colorblindness simulation tool.
Yep.
And this talk was by Jawad Shakil from Ubisoft.
Yep.
I think we can summarize this pretty quickly because a lot of this was a very technical, like, how-to talk. But the short version... Ubisoft have developed an accessibility tool that they've made available open source for anyone to use that simulates colorblindness, but the way that it does it is in real time as an overlay you can put over your game that doesn't stop you playing the game.
Yes.
Like you can, in real time, change how much of the screen you're viewing through a colorblind lens while still interacting with the game, or if you've got multiple monitors, having like one monitor be the game and one colorblind version of the game.
It is both free to use and open source.
Yes.
Which is really important because it's not perfect for everybody to use. I saw somebody commented that in Ubisoft they use PC when they or Microsoft PC when they develop games. So if you're a Mac user, it might be different. They don't know, which is why they made it open source, so that people can just go in and make the changes they need to make it more accessible for them. So it's incredible. I'm so glad we have, and it's really, really cool that we have like, this is like actually breaking news.
And it's nice to see, because we've talked about EA's accessibility patent pledge a bunch on the show. It's really nice that we're seeing other companies starting to get on that track of, if we develop a cool tool, it is for the benefit of the industry, we should probably make it open source so that everyone can benefit from... Because, like, when it comes to accessibility, don't squirrel away your little secrets, help everyone be accessible.
Yes. So, let's jump on to the next one, which is about, like, app accessibility.
Adding support for some of the native assistive technologies in iOS and Android for Unity apps, brackets, a very specific version of Unity. This was the most hyper-specific talk of the day. This is a how-to talk aimed at people who have access to one very specific version of Unity, to how to use tools that are designed primarily for getting text-to-speech support to work in your app, and sort of piggybacking into them to get things like assistive switches and stuff to be supported in your app.
This talk went like way over my head, and like, I'm a nerd, but this was nerd, and I mean that in the absolutely best way ever. It was too tech for me, but that's okay.
Any talk where a screen of code is put up and it's like, this is probably a bit small to read, but if you're a developer, here's how I did this, and it's just like 3 pages of code on the projector. I'm like, this is above my pay grade, but I'm glad that you found a way to use an accessibility plugin that wasn't meant to do something, and you made it do something else.
And I know that someone in the room or somebody online is going to go, oh my god, I feel seen, and also, oh my god, I can use this in my work. It's not going to be me, but I love it for what it is.
Next one that we can talk about pretty quickly is enhancing mobile audio accessibility. And I'm gonna very quickly note for this, just because this is the thing I've been talking about recently. King is owned by Microsoft, who are currently a target of a boycott by the BDS movement for some of Microsoft's involvement in providing services to Israel that may have been used in bombing of Palestine. I think it's still worth talking about the content of this talk, but I think if you want to know more, go read about the BDS boycott of Microsoft and, like, have a read of why they've decided to do that and make your decisions about supporting it.
Yep.
But I think the content of this talk is worth talking about still.
Yeah. So in Norway right now with the BDS thing, we are looking at it in the form of like journalism should not include in boycotting. We should still talk about it, but we should always mention why other people are deciding to boycotting. And we are technically with this podcast doing journalism, so it makes sense.
It's a hard line to walk, and I'll talk a little about this here just very quickly. Because so much of our journalism is specifically about for sale products, but it's like, telling people whether or not to buy products from Microsoft, it's working out where we stand on that line. But I think, like, at least my stance is very much, if we're going to talk about Microsoft products for the time being, we will start that story by talking about the fact the boycott is happening so people are aware and can look into it.
Your video about this was really, really good. Guys, go and check out the Laura's video about it. And, like, I am, honestly, we have had in our my stream team, disabled, I can't remember what it's called, but, like, our stream team, we have had a talk about it, and I had to say, hey, I love people to be able to do it. I will not boycott Microsoft because then I can't play games.
Yeah.
Because I need their tools to be able to play games. That is just how it is. But I think it is important to keep a moment and have a talk about it, which we just
I know this is a little off topic, but I'm going to very quickly say, like, I've talked about this before, the fact that, like, I've boycotted most of Ubisoft's games for, like, the last 4 or 5 years because of some of the abuse scandal stuff that went on. I would not judge anyone who is disabled who still plays Ubisoft games, because I'm like, there are so few companies that are consistently accessible in the way Ubisoft is. I totally understand if Ubisoft is the only ones making games that are accessible to you, going, I don't really have a viable alternative if I boycott them. And I think, like, in a use case like yours where, like, boycotting them means you don't really have a viable alternative that works for your accessibility needs, I think that is, like, a nuanced part of that conversation.
We had a really good saying when we talked with Amy earlier, and I said, like, boycott, if you can't join a boycott, that doesn't equal make you a bad person. Like, boycott needs to have a bigger thing but it needs to be a conversation, and I think that is really good.
It's making sure you take the time to go, can I reasonably engage with this, and if I'm not engaging with it, like, is there a reasonable reason why that's the case?
So and I think it's really important to understand that if you ever see somebody not engaging in a boycott, that does not make them a bad person. At once, you need to actually think a bit more. Is there a reason again why they cannot join it? And is there because sometimes there are actually reasonable reasons why people can't join. But on to the talk.
That being said,
I actually really like this because I think it's important that we start to actually join with mobile games. This was from King, the makers behind Candy Crush. They talked about mobile accessibility. And I like this talk because, one, I need to see more from mobile gaming, because, like, mobile gaming, even though we don't almost never talk about it, it is big part of a lot of gamers are actually mobile gamers. And also it was a really, really good example of that you can be really specific about your accessibility, and that is okay.
Yes, indeed. So the focus of this was talking about, like, different ways that you can support very different players with auditory accessibility needs, and I did really like the how specific they got about the kind of use cases they were looking for. They talked about hearing loss, but also tinnitus, hyperacuitis, which is like oversensitivity to sound, on the opposite end of the scale to hearing loss, misophonia, where audio can sort of make you feel irrationally angry in response to certain kinds of sounds, and variable frequent sensitivity. I'm like, this is way more specific and niche than I usually see discussions of audio accessibility get.
And it shows that, again, like, they chose one topic, and then they got really specific on that topic, and they learned about that topic. You don't need to go into accessibility and do everything. That doesn't work. You are allowed to go into accessibility and do one thing, and do that one thing really, really good. That is enough.
I will note there's one thing I disagreed with this talk on that I was like, I'm not so sure on this, was They did an accessibility day at King to sort of test the results of, whether what they'd implemented was successful for disabled players. And one of the bits of feedback they got was a lot of people asking them for detailed descriptions of what the setting being offered did.
Yeah.
And the reason they decided not to do that was they decided they wanted all of that settings page to fit on one page and not scroll. And as such, they weren't going to add those descriptions.
Yep.
And it's one of those... we've talked about this before. I'm a big believer that if your reason for not implementing additional accessibility is you don't like aesthetically how it looks... Like, we talked about this with Atomfall recently, and being able to turn up the text size so big that things overlap each other. And it's like, I would far rather that happen, but you offered the accessibility, than you go, oh, it's not aesthetic, we won't offer it.
Yeah, I'm sorry for laughing, because, I did laugh earlier when we talked about boycott. I'm sorry, it's not what you're saying I'm laughing about. It's just because it reminded me of something I've talked about today. Because, two things here. One, Amy, the reason why I laughed earlier, because Amy said, this talk is going to make my mom really happy, because this is such a mom game, and I love that. I love that for every single mom out there, because my mom also loved Candy Crush. And number two, but I think what you said about being the information. So I don't technically understand them either. Or let me go this. I can understand wanting a design choice. I can understand that. But I don't understand their argument, because the argument is that we want everything to fit in on one side. But then why don't you have an information icon?
Yeah, part of me was like, could you have a tick box that you click it and it adds descriptions or something like that?
Yes, like most just do that information icon, and then everybody sort of understand by default that then if I press here or a question mark, if I press that one, I will get more
It's the one place in the talk where I was like, I would push back on that a little bit, but I do think the stuff they were offering in-game is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So next up on the list we had extending accessibility to mobile in Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Yes.
So this one was talking about the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown port coming to mobile the day that we record this, and the accessibility benefits and challenges that come from that porting process. One thing that I thought was really interesting insight, it makes a lot of sense, is because Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown was primarily designed for Nintendo Switch first, rather than the other home consoles, it already had quite large text and UI sizes because it was for a smaller screen, which made it really easy to port to mobile, because when you shrink the screen size down, it's already kind of scaled for that. They also talked about the fact that obviously lots of work had already been done on the console version of the game, so a lot of it was just focusing on mobile specific accessibility barriers.
Yeah, so I have to admit that at this point, my brain had started making microwave sounds, so I could not. These are the two last talks. I could not construct. I could not filter in. The only thing I did notice, or Ian actually said it in the Discord, was that not only do they have the same accessibility, because we have never seen this before. Not only does a mobile game has the same accessibility as a regular video game, it has more accessibility.
Right.
That's insane.
I managed to make some notes, so I can give you the quick version.
Good.
They added controller support to the mobile version of the game.
I am really... does that mean that I can, literally just plug in a controller and play?
Yeah, so a lot of mobile, Metroidvanias or side-scrolling shooters will do this. If you, prop your phone up on the table and, Bluetooth a controller to your phone, you can play using a controller. A lot of companies will sell mounts, so let's say you've got your Xbox controller, you put a clip on it and you put your phone in the clip, so your phone is at the top of the Xbox controller, and you play with your Xbox controller on your phone.
Nice.
That's how I used to play Xbox Game Pass games over streaming on my phone, is I would clip my phone onto the top of my Xbox controller and then stream the game over Wi-Fi.
Nice.
But something they pointed out about that is, if you add in controller support, you need to tell your players, in the game, controller support exists, because they had a situation where players were asking them to add controller support to the game, even though controller support was already in the game, because without a pop-up telling them it's there. They just assumed it wasn't there because they hadn't been told.
And again, this is why game accessibility starts with access to information.
Yeah.
I have said it 100 times before, and I am like a broken record, but it's because I know what I'm talking about with these things. You need to inform people.
Yeah.
It's so important. It is. We see it time after time after time, and this is yet another example of that.
The other big thing I'll say, and we can sort of skim through this, is when you're loading up, they have a sort of accessibility onboarding process, and part of that at the start of the mobile version is they give you 3 options of control schemes. PC controls, they call the first one, which is like, we don't automate anything, every button press you got to do the same way you would on console or controller. Simplified, which simplifies a lot of things, but their standard one in the middle is mobile, and they described it as having like sensible levels of assist, and that means things like if you've got a potion in your pocket and you are low on health, you will automatically use the potion.
Oh, that's right.
If you want to do a parry, rather than pressing a button at the right timing, as long as you're not touching any inputs on the screen when a parry would need to happen, it will automatically do the parry.
Good.
So just like, as long as you're not running or jumping, you will automatically parry. You could set it to do things like automating attacks, where like your basic hits will happen automatically. You only have to press buttons if you want to change that into a more complicated combo. Things that are like recognizing that you're trying to shove 15 buttons worth of controls onto a touchscreen without overly cluttering the screen, and trying to make sensible decisions about like what to automate and what to leave in place to keep complexity.
And I think this is, first and foremost, thank you so much for doing this for me, because like you're literally doing let's summarize a whole talk to make it easier. This is accessibility in life. No, but like, I think it's important because mobile games, I have 2 thoughts about this. One, mobile games are, I don't think people understand how many disabled people have not bought themselves a console because they think they cannot play games. But they have a phone, and then they've started to realize, hey, mobile games are actually something I want to jump into. And mobile games are actually a lot of, especially for blind players, are actually something that they can enjoy and play. So I think it is important to start talking about this with mobile games, but then you need to have understanding, which is my second point, that hey, it is a different medium.
Yes. I think a lot about mobile games in terms of like, when I was recovering from surgery like 5-10 years ago, I needed for a while to be able to play games one-handed, and like mobile was a great platform for that. There are definitely accessibility benefits unique to the platform. You have to just recognize like it is a different platform to a console or a PC, and if not design the game around that, be really thoughtful about like how you can make your game work within the benefits of that hardware as best you can.
It's back to the red thread I talked about earlier, where like we have this knowledge now, we need to just reformat on our next project, if that is the next game or if that is a next like format where we're giving out our game. You need to start like really home in on those things you are making it for. You need to start thinking about who am I making this for, and that is the basic of all accessibility we use, like who are going to be your end user, but also what controller is your end user going to use it on. So and then the last talk of the day, which I don't think either of us have a huge amount to say about because we've talked about this company a lot already on Control.access, was Mind the Gap, the Agile plus accessibility research and development behind AbleToPlay. We've talked about AbleToPlay. They are the website where you put in all of your accessibility needs and wants, and they spit out sort of recommended scores for different games. This talk was more about like the process behind how they sort of iterated and did R&D to get to the website existing. I don't think we have a huge amount to say about that, other than the website is interesting. I have 3 points. Because I see there is 3 things people have started talking about in the Discord, and I also had the same question, but they answered in the Discord. I saw, So what? No, they do not use AI.
There was a question about that during the talk, and I think that talk earlier that explicitly used AI had it on people's minds.
But I also think I understand why they asked that, because I was sitting there halfly paying attention because I was so tired, and I was just like, wait a second, do you mean that you're using AI. So I can understand why that was a
Yeah,
question.
they said something about trying to set up their processes so that they could, quote, basically automate themselves.
Yes.
That, like, it's something they said that sounded like describing
Yes.
AI in a way that was a
Yes.
little iffy.
Yeah. So, but they answered, no, they do not
Yep.
use AI. And then a lot of people were like, hey, are you telling us that you are doing things to sort of not pay people?
Yeah.
And that they also answered that, where they said like, hey, what we're saying is that no, when we are doing research, like this is the easy part, we're not necessarily paying for, but actually when people need to do work for us, we are paying 100% pay them.
The way the talk was structured, being very honest, did sound like a lot of, here is all the steps we put in place to get as much free work as we could before we paid anyone. And like, I was like, I want to rewatch this talk when I'm a bit more awake. I think it was just a poorly thought through way of explaining what they were doing.
Yes, but they had answers for all of them, so which is also, I agree with you, I need to rewatch it. Was the impression I'm left with now the actual impression I was supposed to be left with when I'm not tired? The only thing I really actually want to hold on is that the talker used the word
differently abled.
Differently abled. We do not use that word. We are either, which I like to be, disabled gamer or gamer with disability.
Yeah.
Either or.
Like, there's other bits of language you might see in other regions. Like, sometimes Americans will use the term handicapped because, like, that is the accepted terminology there. To my understanding, both in America and here, it's very much like, differently abled is... It's one of those terms that feels like it's a shame to say disability might just make things harder sometimes. It feels like, no, there's got to be different benefits to it.
No, like, if disability is not a bad word in English, that is just how it is. I can understand if you speak another language, like in Norwegian, we have our own scope of words to use and not use, but if you are speaking English, you will always be safe to either use the word the disabled gamer or gamer with disability, depending, like, and if you
that's a very personal preference.
Yes, if you want to be absolutely safe, you will never go wrong by saying gamer with disability. That is the safest thing you can do. But disability is not a bad word, and I think I want to end on that because, like, I think the talk was good. I really enjoy what AbleToPlay are doing. I think they are doing a really, really good work. But maybe this talk didn't hit that well. Yes.
It wasn't the best sales pitch for what I think is interesting about what they do.
Yes, sadly. But hey, maybe when I rewatch it, I will have some different notes. If I have some different notes, I will take them and come back with them on a later episode.
This is the end of day one of GA Conf. We might be recording day 2 from GA Conf. We might be recording it from home. It depends how tomorrow goes.
Yeah, it does.
But it's always nice to do one of these in person.
It's lovely.
Yeah. So I think we're going to try and do this all as one episode. So in a moment, you will see us at the end of day 2 of GA Conf, or a couple of days after, back at home. Bye. Hello, we're back. It's day 2 of GA Conf, or at least day 2 of GA Conf has happened. We're a couple of days afterward, as you can probably see by us not being in the same room in a hotel at this point.
What do you mean, Laura? I'm still in England. I just took my whole room with me to England, of course.
Yeah, we were gonna record at the end of day 2, and then we just couldn't find a convenient recording space toward the end of the day, so we were like, it's fine. We'll talk about day 2 of GA Conf when we get back. So, should we just jump right in at the start of day 2 of talks?
Absolutely.
So day 2 started with conducting effective accessibility research, a case study in accessible music games, by Dr. Alexander Horowitz from Criterion Games. And this did a bunch of research to do with looking at what existing research already existed for music and for accessibility and games, and then where like 2 of those overlapped, and then where all 3 of them overlapped, which is the bit that he was sort of struggling to find existing research on.
Yes.
with the aim of, by the end of this research, he created a game that is available for free online called Soundtown, which is a one-button game for people with complex physical and cognitive disabilities that can be played with one button for all the mini games, two buttons to get through all the navigation.
Yeah. It was just in general a really, really good talk. Alexander knows how to stand on a stage, that's for sure. And also, I think everybody who's as nerd as us was just like, yes, data, yes, system, yes, organization. I think everybody was just happy about seeing that. But it was nice to see.
Yeah, I think everyone particularly enjoyed the section of the talk that was just him talking about, like, printing out physical copies of every talk he could find, like every paper he could find that was kind of to do with the topic, and physically spreading them out and sorting them into areas and doing his, like, annotated bibliography, highlighting passages and timelines. I'm like,
yep,
that's the good bit.
I think it also two things I'm like left with is that it is nice also to see games being made for people with severe disability. I think often we talk about people with a disability where we still have a level of independence.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that is just not the reality. And then it's nice to also see games for people who are severely affected by their illness and disability. And that is fun. And I also really, really enjoyed that he said creation, not standardization. And what he meant about that was that because he had taken the like guidelines we often have out, one of them being game accessibility guideline, which I use a lot. And then he talked about like how when they work and when they do not necessarily work, and why like these are really good resources, but having like it as a standard might not get you where you want to go. And he had a bit talk about that, which was interesting.
He had a great example based on an old XQC webcomic where you start with 14 competing standardizations and you go, surely there's a way that we can like combine all of these and create a new standard that unifies everything. And the end result is you now have 15 competing standards.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a couple of things I thought were really good in this talk. I like the way that he talked about like what his aims were with that audio game, particularly given the particular audience of disabled people that he was targeting. He talks about like designing to have no fail state because you can't fail at playing the piano or like playing with a doll's house. Those are exploratory, playful activities. They're not fail state activities. About making sure that whatever he designed was able to create emergent cool moments, and that coming from the intersection of having agency with how you engage with the game and unique end results based on how you exercise that agency.
Yes.
And about the context of like developing this potentially for use in like schools or education contexts. The desire for it to be about concrete rather than abstract concepts and having clear cause and effect between actions and results. And it's like that kind of insight into the thought process behind this game's development I think was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I also got to go through his PhD because he had it with him. And I got to like talk to him a bit, and he said that they are looking into getting his PhD researched, reduced a bit, like make it a bit smaller, and actually release it out as a book. So this information will hopefully be available, and I added him on LinkedIn, and I will keep you guys updated when we end up seeing something, or this will like be more public knowledge. But I highly recommend that talk, and he was we needed him in the morning because he was so ready to be on that stage.
Given how theoretically academic that talk could have ended up,
Yeah.
He made it very digestible and approachable for a group of people who just rolled in the morning and were still waking up a little bit.
100%.
And then from there we go into possibly my favorite talk of this year's GA Conf. I try not to have favorites, but I think this one was fantastic in its complexity.
Yep.
Nobody wants to make players sick. Talking about vestibular and neurological conditions. This was hosted by Stacey Jenkins and Adrian Thompson from Ubisoft. And this is the most comprehensive talk about motion sickness, migraines, and photosensitivity that I have ever seen given in the accessibility space, and it is so good.
It was amazing. And like, I often have said that maybe the last 2 years that like I don't necessarily go to GA Conf to learn new things, because a lot of the things that I've said is thing that for me is everyday knowledge because we work on this in this field. But this talk was, oh my god, I'm learning so many new things. My, like, the page I have with notes is just so much, because I learned a lot of things I did not know from before, and it was so lovely, especially the fact that you actually can get motion sickness from sound. And that was something I never ever knew. I have never thought about it. It makes sense that panning sounds make the effect of something moving or you moving around, but you are still standing still, and that is again a mismatch, and then you can get motion sick. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, I came to this talk from a slightly different perspective. A lot of this is stuff that I know as someone that like does a lot of work in a lot of my cognitive accessibility work often ends up centering on motion sickness because I really acutely suffer from it. But a lot of the time when I argue for some of these things being motion sickness triggers, I will get told, okay, well, where's the evidence that that's a motion sickness trigger? And it's going to be really nice to have a comprehensive and like professionally delivered talk that does acknowledge that a lot of these things that like anecdotally I have been talking about as motion sickness triggers for a long time all put together in one place where I can be like, yes, someone else is pointing out that these are a thing.
Yes.
It's not just me.
And I was... Continue.
Sorry, yeah? No, go ahead.
I am also really impressed that because like they talked about motion sickness, but also in this talk had about migraines and seizures, and getting it through that getting a seizure, most of us will have one seizure in our life. We will never know which, like what will trigger it. But luckily that often stays with one seizure and never goes anywhere more. But it is not so uncommon as people might know. I know that photosensitivity is just 8% of people with epilepsy have photosensitivity. But seizure is so much more than just photosensitivity, so much more than just epilepsy. It is, and it can be triggered by so much more. So it was nice. I for some reason, I felt that this talk was just reassuring. And I cannot wait. I need some time now. I'm really tired after a London trip. But I want to sit down and like actually write out with my own words what they went through and make it sort of like my own notes. As you say, in the meeting with people and going like, hey, here is what we also have. They also did have some sources, which I can't wait to look into.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things in this that I think are really important that they touched on that I want to like quickly rattle through. They talked a lot about the fact that motion sickness, migraines, and photosensitivity, all of them are way more common than you would expect, but are also, if you do not account for them properly in terms of accessibility, you can not only cause someone to have in the moment an issue, but you can cause an ongoing, persistent, chronic health condition in someone if you thoughtlessly put in place the triggers that cause someone to have their first major response to something.
Yes.
And that it's really important to, wherever it is possible, design to be inherently accessible for these groups of people rather than via settings. Because if someone has never had a bout of severe motion sickness or a migraine or a photosensitive response, they're not going to know to go in the settings and turn on whatever protect me from vestibular responses setting, because they'll go, I've never had a bad response.
Yes.
But things like motion sickness, literally anyone can be injured by a severe enough motion sickness trigger, even if they've never experienced motion sickness before. You can be... If someone doesn't know to turn a setting off, and you rely on that too much, you can be the reason someone now has a chronic, lifelong health condition.
Yes.
That has, like, as they pointed out, can have multiple day lingering impact. Like, if you trigger bad enough motion sickness in someone, they might not be able to go to work for the next 2 days because, like, they're having lingering impacts of how badly they were impacted by motion sickness. It's not a case of they put the game down and they're fine. It's you might literally prevent them from doing real life tasks for an extended period of time if you're not careful.
And I remember Ian last year, because Ian Hamilton, Ian behind this Conf or as part of it, talked about his experience in the Discord. He also did it this year.
Yeah.
And he last year talked about how you can look at motion sickness as a cup where it gets filled up every time you get triggered. And for most people along going up that cup, it is enough to lay the game down or do something else. But then one day that cups is filled to the brim and it spills over, and then is when it came game to be chronic, or a big spurt, something that really triggers it, just fills the cup too much, it spills over, and now you don't have anywhere to go. Every time you get triggered, it spills over, no matter how little or big, and that affects you, as you say, every single day. Ian even said it was really interesting looking at the Discord while this chat was going, people giving like telling stories about how they have been so harshly triggered because they were supposed to work on something and they told, we can't continue working on this, I get triggered, and their boss just said, no, you have to continue because this is just how it is, like, power through it. This is never something you should power through. If you get motion sickness, you should stop. And somebody else in chat also talked about how now they're, due to motion sickness, they also get affected by things like shoving their kid on a swing or pushing their kid on a swing, where like these everyday things that has nothing to do with games still trigger motion sickness because this glass is overfilled, the glass has already spilled.
I put a video out this past year, I can't remember exactly when it was, that was based on a conversation I had with Ian Hamilton at Conf last year, followed up by a conversation I had with Stacey Jenkins at Develop, I think it was. Talking about the video game that triggered severe motion sickness in me, that caused me to have that as a lifelong issue, because I can identify the exact game it was that I played that permanently worsened my motion sickness to the point that it became a chronic issue that I talk about in Accessibility. Was a game called Golem for the original PSVR that I reviewed for Polygon, and because I was playing it for work, I felt an obligation to try and brute force my way through it, if nothing else. Like, I didn't end up finishing playing that game, but I forced myself to play enough of it that I could articulate what it was about that game that was causing me, as a not particularly motion sickness prone person, to feel motion sick. Forever since then, I've had far worse motion sickness, far more easily triggered, far longer repercussions when it activates. And like that whole thing of, if you try and brute force through motion sickness, it makes it infinitely worse and turns it into a chronic condition, is something that's like not taken seriously. Like in the VR space, it's so often written off as, oh, you just need to power through it and get your VR legs. And it's like, no. Other things that I thought were like, I'm glad this was harped on. This came up in a couple of talks, but I think this is the right place to talk about it. The EU now has a piece of legislation called the GPSR that requires that any piece of software or device that is sold in the EU needs to come with minimal or no risk to the end user, and that includes motion sickness, migraines, and epilepsy, and photosensitivity. And that if you're selling something in the EU, you are now legally obligated to make sure that you have minimized or removed the risk of these things. You are legally required to do at least the due diligence of like the bare minimum you can to reduce motion sickness, and that is important to know.
Yep. And what is important also with that legislation that comes now, is it that one you're talking about, the one that will be in effect in 2 months?
Yes, sorry, yes, in 2 months.
Because what is important with that is that it's a consumer right law. It's not a business law, because if it was concerned on the business, they could only affect people where their business is in the EU.
Yeah.
But because it protects the consumer, it will protect everybody who will sell to anyone in the EU. So even though your company is based in China, Japan, America, Congo, wherever, if you sell to Europe, you have to abide by these rules. So that is why they're trying to do though. So yeah, it is important to start thinking about.
Yeah, last things very quickly. I like that this talk acknowledged that removing 100% of all potential triggers may be unreasonable.
Yep.
But reducing the amount of triggers that are there, the intensity of the triggers that you do include, and making sure that the triggers that remain are ones that you've thoughtfully included and that you have made a conscious choice about, is like where that sort of barrier of requirement is.
Yes.
And then again, as you touched on, protect developers. They should not, developers should not be in a situation where they are forced to, quote unquote, power through motion sickness while working on games, much in the same way as game reviewers should be allowed to put a game down and go, this game is causing me illness, and the game is to a degree at fault for that, and it's okay for me to talk about the fact the game is making me ill and that the game could have done more to prevent that.
Yep.
Protect people whose job it is to engage with games.
Yes.
From
you should be safe.
The idea that they're obligated to get ill for their job.
Yes, you should be safe at your job. Like, that is a given. As long as you and in the end, like, thinking about it, like putting it in perspective, it's games. Like, of course we should be safe at our job. It's games. It's not like we're doing anything that society absolutely need in a crisis and you just need to do it. No, it's games. So
exactly.
Let's everybody be safe.
So next talk up in the day was TLDH, which I assume stands for Too Long Didn't Hear. Deafness and Gaming, which was hosted by Cameron Akit from PlayStation.
Yes.
And this talk did a good job of being like an overall talk on different things that someone might mean when they talk about support for deaf players and what kind of groups of people that might be supporting, and giving contextual examples of like target users you might be designing for and how their needs might differ. The best way I can summarize it is they largely talked about the ideas of big capital D deaf, meaning cultural deaf, someone who perhaps doesn't view being deaf as a disability, who views it as a cultural identifier, someone small d deaf that might follow the medical or disability model of how they view their hearing loss, and hard of hearing, sort of mild to moderate hearing loss, often comes alongside things like age, and how those identities exist along the spectrum between wanting help accessing sound versus preferring or needing alternatives to sound in game design.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that is really important to note with this is that for a lot of people in the deaf community, deaf with a big D, they look at BSL or their way, depending on which country they're from and which language they speak, but their sign language to be their native language. They do not look at English or whatever other language that is in the country they live in as their mother tongue, their native language at all.
Which we've talked about this before. It's why Forza Horizon including sign language interpreter support was so useful, because like, again, we've said this before, it's really important to understand that if someone's first language is, say, BSL, for example, written English is a different language.
Yes.
It is using different words, the sentence structure and grammatical rules are different, and even if someone whose first language is BSL can read written English, they're having to go through, if nothing else, they're having to translate signs into written words and also rearrange the sentence structure of the sentence. That is not as natural as just seeing someone speaking in their native language.
Yes, and also there was a big focus on barrier-free versus removing barrier, where barrier-free is like good game design, but removing barriers is good setting design. And a difference there, which I thought was cool, because a lot of times we are sort of, we put those things up in each other and go like, no, don't do options, do good design. But both of them can be good. It's just the means of what you want to do with it. What you want to do with your accessibility and when it matches in and when it fits in. And it was a bunch of good examples. I recommend, again, go and checking it out, especially if you want to make a game that helps deaf player understand more and play your game better. Go check it out. A brilliant good examples. And then the absolutely best ever quote ever in my life came from Cameron, who said, I always get asked, can't deaf people read English? And I always answer, can't hearing people read Dutch. And I loved it. As somebody who does not have English as my first language, it resonated so much with me. And I'm going to use this so much going forward, because I work so much with studios not based in English. And yes.
As Dutch was such a good example for this, as like I've been learning German over the last year, very slowly trying to learn German, and very similarly to Dutch, it's one of those, if you put a German sentence in front of me, there's a good chance I'll recognize a few words that are similar to English words, and I can maybe muddle out some meaning from the sentence, but it's going to take me a longer period of time. I'm going to be less accurate. I'm going to be guessing at meaning. And this is with a language where some of the words look like words I already know. Even like that's I've got a head start on compared to someone whose first language is BSL, trying to read written English. It was such a great thought exercise for, even if someone can do this, why might it take longer and be more cognitively taxing, and why might that person just want a native translation?
And like, I just felt so reassured, as like, even last podcast I talked about how South of Midnight was in my native language, and how good that felt, like how reassuring it felt being seen in that way. And then I come to this talk and Cameron says this brilliantly, and it just shows that localization, which also includes sign language, is brilliant and something that should be more normalized, especially from big games.
I do want to bring up, this didn't come up during Cameron's talk, but this was something that Cameron brought up at, I might have been at Develop last year. Cameron brought up a fascinating idea that I've not seen any games attempt, which is, if you're a developer that technologically or financially can't implement sign language interpreter support in your game, but you do want to make your written English subtitles more accessible to deaf players, one option could be writing English language subtitles, but with, say, British Sign Language sentence structure. Like, writing the words in the order that they would be used in British Sign Language might make those subtitles easier to read at a glance for someone whose first language is BSL. I don't know if that's still a stance that he holds, but it was a really interesting idea that he brought up that I think about a lot when I hear him talk.
Yep.
But yeah, next up on the list was the developer panel talking about user experience. This involved Jordan DeVries, Chloe Patricia Hodgson, Sierra Leishman, and Just Peters.
Yes.
Building accessible player experiences via user experience.
Yep.
I can run through some quick stuff that came out of this. It was a very good panel. The general takeaways that I had. We talked before about the fact that, like, settings aren't inherently better or worse than in having design that's inherently accessible. A great example of something that should be a setting rather than being inherent design is high contrast mode.
Yeah.
That is hugely helpful for some users, but would be very detrimental to other users. And sort of acknowledging that settings customization is a benefit that is an option that video games have available to them, that like other art forms don't have that option. You know, a painting, you can offer assistive aids, but like you can't toggle on and off accessibility in a painting or in a book.
Yeah.
Video games are uniquely presented to go, sometimes this accessibility thing will be good for some people but not others, and we can toggle that on and off as and when it's useful. There's also discussion in there of like, sometimes the best way to get an accessibility setting into a game is to disguise it as something else. See Detective Vision in the Batman games. Disguising it as an in-universe ability rather than a setting can sometimes help you to justify getting the budget for it and get it past people who might not give you the money to develop it otherwise. Making sure that games offer alternative content, not just the option to skip something. The example here being like, if you're playing The Last of Us Part 2 via audio navigation as a sightless player, there are certain puzzles that are inaccessible that the game will just give you the option to skip. But instead, you could do something like, when you're doing text captures to prove you're not a robot on the computer, if you can't see, they'll often give you an audio capture instead, where they read out letters and numbers for you to type. Design secondary puzzles for players so that they don't just have to skip, but they can maybe engage with an audio puzzle instead of a visual one.
Yep.
Being sort of the gold standard of what we should aim for. In pre-production, right at the start of development, if you can already decide that certain features are going to be the goal, like high contrast or minimum text size, that's going to be much easier, obviously, than trying to add or correct those later on. That's where you get into those problems of like, oh, we could add that accessibility setting, we could let you slide the text to a larger size, but it would ruin the aesthetic of the menu.
Yeah.
If you decide you want to offer like 138 point text font right from the start, you design your UI so that that will look okay, rather than going, yeah, but if we implement it now, it'll ruin the aesthetic.
Yeah.
And then last one, and I know you're a big fan of this, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yay! Yes.
Don't let the fact you can't do everything stop you from doing what you can do.
Yeah. That is like, it's just easy peasy lemon squeezy, just, yeah, because so many people get overwhelmed and like sort of locked and freezed because there are so many things they should do, and then it's better to just do one thing. One thing.
Exactly. So then we got onto the micro talks portion of the day, and we started with a really accessible and not overly complicated academic talk. Representation of invisible disability, teens with ADHD. So yeah, what did you think of this talk?
So, it was cool. So what the talk was that Catherine Gerlin had done research for, I think it was kids?
Teenagers,
yes, with ADHD. And she, if I'm not mistaken correctly, she had like 3 questions in the start. Then they did some more research, and then they came down to more set ideas or set answers.
So she got this group of teenagers with ADHD and did some surveys with them to like understand what aspects of their condition did they think people sort of misunderstood, and what would they like in terms of representation or mechanical implementation of their disability into games. And she originally comes up with these 3 examples of like games that might either literally or mechanically represent ADHD. One of them is called Restaurant Disaster. It is about like juggling just the inherent chaos of trying to run this kitchen. One was an RPG game about tricky, difficult inventory management. And one was a minigame where you had to be playing 4 minigames at once. And whichever minigame you were most neglecting, like you weren't keeping up with as fast as the others, the character in that minigame would get mad at you for neglecting what they needed you to do, despite the fact you were trying to do 3 other things at the same time.
Yes. And I this was quite interesting because what I actually found more interesting than anything was the knowledge from the teens that they had talked to.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of talk, and there was a lot of talk in the Discord, where in the Discord we had grown-ups talking about their experience with their ADHD, and then from this study we had teens talking, and it seems to be a bit divided, which shows that ADHD is a really complex diagnostic to have. From the study, we saw that they talked about that they found their life quite challenging with this diagnostic. It was quite challenging for them, and that medication wasn't always positive for them, and they didn't always feel understood by the people around them. They tried to explain what they were feeling, and people sort of didn't understand what they tried to relay, which is why these games could have helped them people to understand better.
Yeah, it was interesting. As someone with ADHD, I had a lot of respect for these kids that were willing to tell these researchers, like, no,
yes.
you've tried coming up with these ideas based on what we told you, and you've kind of misunderstood what we've tried to tell you.
Yes.
Like they talk a bit about like the restaurant disaster idea not really working for them because ADHD is not just general generic chaos. This example was not like nuanced or specific enough to feel like representation. That these game ideas were very focused on the negatives of ADHD, not enough on the strengths, which, like, yeah, as someone that is medicated for ADHD, I can recognize all of the benefits that being medicated has for me, but I can also go, when I wasn't medicated, I used to be able to, like, absolutely, to my own detriment, be incredibly productive to an unhealthy amount, but I used to be able to, like, I was seeking dopamine wherever I could, and that meant churn out 1 billion articles a day. And, like, yeah, there was positives to that, even if it wasn't healthy. But that, like, these kids were like, there are things that I like more about myself when I'm unmedicated, even if, on balance, that's not where I should be. And these games don't focus enough on the fact that, like, ADHD can have benefits.
Yes, I think Catherine said it really, really well, and she, like, summarized it with, they wanted correct representation and the knowledge that having ADHD is a struggle, but with independent strength. Like, it is a struggle for many of these kids, teenagers, I mean, to have it. They think it is a struggle, but they also see strength in it. They also see positive things with it, and that was what they want. They want people to understand when do they need help, when do they need support, and when is it a good thing for them.
It's one of those things, like, the best way I can explain it is there are times as an adult who is now medicated for ADHD where I will opt not to take my ADHD meds for a little bit for certain kinds of work because I know that there are certain strengths to having ADHD or certain things that I can benefit from. For me, it's brainstorming. If I am at the point where it's like I need to come up with a bunch of ideas and, like, work out what my next creative projects are and be allowed to be a bit scatterbrained and come up with 1 billion ideas at once rather than, like, going, I came up with one thought, now I will sit and do that thought. Like, being medicated is great for, I need to do this, I'll sit down and do it. Not so great for, actually, I quite like the scatterbrained chaos that can be where my most creative stuff comes from. And, like, acknowledging that duality of, ADHD comes with problems, I might, like, when unmedicated, zone out entirely and forget to get off the train and now have to take another train backwards the other direction to get that grabbers going. It's not always great, but it's got its moments.
And I think that is really good. I think the talk conveyed that really, really well. And also what also one of the conclusions was that ADHD is not all that the person is. That some of these teens feels like the world around them looks at them as ADHD and not a person with ADHD. And I found it to be really cool. It is, again, go and check it out. Why do I say that after every point? But it is true, though. Go check it out. A bunch to learn. Might not agree because, like, it is hard with these kind of things, that when you do research and you don't have, because depth research you necessarily don't have like hundreds to talk to, you have a set small number, and you might disagree with it, and that is okay. And that is like important to remember, that this isn't saying that this is the only way of thinking and feeling about ADHD, but this is the truth for these teens that Catherine talked to.
And it's nice seeing, like, specifically teenage perspectives being given prominence and space to be, like, valid and a focus of conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
So then we have Ian Hamilton gave a micro talk on how to measure text size.
Yep.
And this is just, like, there's not a huge amount to say about this other than I learned mechanically some useful things about knowing exactly how to say what the size of a font is.
Yes. This is a how-to deluxe.
Yeah, the short version of it. If you select 26 pixels as your text height in Photoshop or something, that doesn't actually mean that your text, that each letter in your font is at least 26 pixels high. What that tells you is the box that all of your letters will fit within is a 26 pixel high box, and that the maximum height from the lowest to the highest that a letter in that font could be might be 26 pixels, but most letters in most fonts won't use up that whole box.
Yeah.
And therefore, here's where to measure from and to, and how to select which letters in your alphabet to get your reference point for, like, what size is this font at a minimum.
Yes, and it was a smart little tidbit of, we have this pandemic in the gaming industry of giving us the smallest text imaginable on a screen at any given time, because the game is made a meter away from the screen, and then you play it 5 meters away in a sofa, and you can't read shit to save your life. And I'm so glad we have more like because it's 15 minutes, and it's literally a, hey, here is what you have done wrong, watch this. 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you understand it.
There's no opinion in this one. It is purely, here's how to do the thing correctly. Yes. There you go. There's your 15 minutes.
Yes. And it's also put in, like, this is the standard of text like size on TV. Normally, when you use this small, doesn't work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Somebody says it.
Honestly, I appreciate Conf having space for talks that are just like, here's how to do it. Done.
Yeah.
Go.
Just do it correctly.
Yeah. Then we had Writing for Everyone by Jade Summers, which is talking about UX writing.
Yeah.
This is specifically stuff like help text, tutorial text, error message text, not your narrative text, but the kind of text that breaks the fourth wall and just talks to the real-world player about, like, here is the information you need to play the game properly.
Yeah.
And, like, there was some good insights in here that I very much agree with, and that I wish more writing in general took into account. Things like, aim for your writing to be readable for, statistically, the reading age of 12 to 14-year-olds.
Yep.
Even for content that you're aiming for an adult-only audience, to benefit, like, low literacy users. I'm a big believer that, like, it is very rare that you should ever need to use language that a 12 to 14-year-old wouldn't understand.
Yes.
To communicate an idea, and often when writers do, they're doing so for their own feeling of pride more than they are for, like, communicating in a way that is going to benefit the largest number of readers.
Cough, cough, academics text. Cough,
I mean,
cough.
yeah, academics text indeed, but even, like, you see it a lot in fiction writing.
Yeah.
Like, there is no reason that you needed to write that the way you did. You did it to feel smart and to seem like a smart writer.
Yep. At
the expense of how many people would be able to engage with and understand your work. Also, like, pointing to examples of things like Botany Manor's motion sickness. Having clear explanations of what your settings options do and how to change them in a helpful direction if you need them. is like a great example of clear UX writing.
Yes,
Um,
I'm so glad. That was like, because I played the demo, and I made a YouTube about it, and that was like the biggest like challenge I had. I like had like a whole spiel on how the game
yeah.
Botany Manor made me horrendous motion sick because I did not understand which way they wanted me to turn the dials. And then seeing that update in the final game was so good. So good.
hmm
It
Yeah.
yeah, it makes a change, like especially things like that. And also just remember, when you develop a game, the people who are playing your game aren't developers, so words and lingo that is useful in the gaming industry isn't necessarily noticeable or like used in any other context. So I have seen a lot of setting explanation that explains things with lingo from our industry, and then it's just like, okay, but
Yeah.
I understand what you mean, but like if my dad picked up a controller, he would have no idea what you meant.
I watched a great video. I wish I could remember the YouTube channel. I might try and include it in the video description for this. Of someone who plays a lot of video games getting their non-gamer girlfriend to play Elden Ring for the first time.
Yes.
And how often in that game, when a text pop-up pops up trying to explain something to the player, it is just absolutely littered with gamer lingo that you have to already understand the meaning of to understand the new thing it's trying to teach you.
Yep.
And the amount of, like, assumed knowledge in that UX text made it inaccessible. And, like, it's a great example of exactly what this talk's trying to get at, I think.
Absolutely.
Then we have From Champions to a Dedicated Role, IOI, which is IO Interactive's accessibility journey so far. This is basically talking about, like, the person who's been in charge of accessibility at IO Interactive, trying to create, like, a wider company culture of accessibility.
Yes.
And that started with they had something called IOI Week once per year, which was like a week for everyone at the company to just like go and experiment with things and develop things and show everyone what they worked on. And they did a project to do with accessibility for one of these one year. And a bunch of the developers were like, "Oh, this is really interesting," which led to monthly accessibility meetings, which then led to consultant Q&As, getting consultants in to share their stories and experiences, which led to a monthly accessibility newsletter, and this being a way to take one initial bit of excitement about accessibility and turn it into regular ongoing conversation so that the topic isn't forgotten by the wider company culture.
Yep. And then...
Is that a good way to summarize that?
Yes. And I think what Joshua talked a bit about in the start was really interesting, that a lot of people at their team were passionate about accessibility, but they did not have any accessible role at their company.
Yeah.
So what happens was that people, quote unquote, snuck accessibility into their game, which, like, not meaning that they had to hide it, but like they were just like, oh, I want to make this part accessible. And that got picked up by accessibility reviewers and people playing the game. The problem was that since it was just put in a bit nilly-willy what and when things got put in, they gave it positive reviews, but also quite negative reviews, because people didn't understand, why have you put in this amazing accessibility here and then forgotten some basic things over here? It made the consumer a bit confused, which is what inspired they starting to have this week and started to like inspire things that, oh, maybe if we do it a bit more intentional, it's easier for the end user and the gamer to understand what we actually want with this. And
it's that conversation we've definitely had before of the, how did you know enough to put this really uncommon feature in that's really good, but you didn't think to do the really basic stuff that we're constantly asking people for?
Yes, and I think this is a great example from a company that did that. And today they have Joshua now has a like role as an accessibility in-house, and I think he ended on something really cool, and that was that he said that you cannot look at companies like Naughty Dog and say, I want to be that, and expect to be that for the next week. That is not possible. the best goal you can have, or a great goal you can have, is to just become more accessible than before. So you need to get inspired by people around you, but the goals and the vision needs to come from within you. And there was quite a good quote about things that people in Discord talked about, and one of the things they said was that no, this isn't actually a quote. Oh no, what was this? Oh, this is me seeing on Blue Sky the other day. Oh no, I need to find this because it's brilliant. Let me quickly find it. Yes. Topper Windward said on Blue Sky the other day, accessibility features take months. Accessibility culture takes years. Both are worth building. And this is building accessibility culture in your company.
Yes.
And it's a really good how-to. So if you're thinking about starting it in your company, take notes from here.
Agreed. And then the last big one that we've got notes on is taking a cricket bat to accessibility barriers in Atomfall.
Yes.
This was a really good talk in terms of like structuring how to think about accessibility from one project to another. So some notes I've got from this one. They have a structure within Rebellion for when you're going from one game to the next in terms of accessibility. Maintain, which is look at your old features, can we bring them forward? Improve, what current features do we have and could we have made those features better in their execution? And expand, look at what places are doing in the industry, look at what people are asking for, what new things can we add in?
Yep.
And this sort of maintain, improve, expand formula being their basis for trying to make sure that they don't backslide and that they keep improving in what they offer. They talk about having a specialized accessibility QA team, and accessibility meetings every 2 weeks within the company to make sure that there are dedicated people looking for accessibility during playtesting, and that conversations are happening regularly enough so that like development doesn't go too far down one way before accessibility gets back in the conversation.
Yep.
We talked about a lot of the things that like this game was doing well accessibility-wise when it came out not that long ago. Being able to set the text size to 104 pixels, even if that sort of breaks things aesthetically in some places. 200% text scale when you first boot the game up. The game is colorblind friendly by default, rather than needing filters.
Yeah.
Which it helps that they had someone colorblind on the dev team that could sort of help with that along the way. Making sure to have one-handed and left-handed presets. One thing I really like, and I love when devs do this, was they acknowledged their explicit inspirations on where some of their new features came from. And this is one I'd guessed at when doing the review, which is Sea of Thieves and its audio aiming method.
Yeah.
Was direct inspiration for the audio aiming in Atomfall. And I'm like, great, hell yeah, give a thumbs up to the people who you got inspired by.
And it is allowed. We have said it 1,000 times before. We will say it 1,000 times again. And 1,000 people at that conference said if it were to be 1,000 people there, and that is you're allowed to take things that other are done good and do it again. Like I understand, like the core values of the game. You don't never want to steal out like the story and things like that, design and stuff. Accessibility is not in that boat. Accessibility, you are allowed to borrow. If somebody else have done some really cool accessibility feature, you're allowed to copy that. No one is going to get angry at you. People are just going to go, hey, that's cool that this continues being a thing. And if you're the first that does something accessibility, you will be remembered to be the first. So don't be afraid that you will take spotlight from somebody else. People will know. So go out there, learn from other games, talk to other developers, and you will find a lot of good information.
Yeah. And then the last talk of the day that we probably don't need to dig into too much info on here because like it's all stuff we've talked about on the show before.
Yeah.
The last talk of the day was talking about the Xbox Adaptive Controller and its legacy and impacts in the industry and like why it is a good device to exist and the things that now exist probably because the Xbox Adaptive Controller existed first.
Yep.
Great talk for people who don't know about that topic already, but I think it's one that was very much not aimed for us as an audience.
Yeah.
And that is okay. The GA Conf as an event is You know, it has everything from very beginner talks for people who are just getting to know this stuff to academic talks that might fly entirely over our heads.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about the technical, really technical small talk for day one, and like that just flew straight over my head. And I'm just like, this is so good. I don't understand anything you're saying, but keep on being good.
This was the opposite end of the scale for us to that one where they showed like 3 pages of code on screen, and we were like, okay, sure, I'm sure that code's interesting.
And that is allowed. It should be something for everyone. So yeah, good work. And it is a legacy. The Xbox adaptive controller is literally a legacy. So it's nice that it gets its proper shout out.
Yeah.
But yeah, Laura.
Yeah, that's GA Conf for 2025.
It is going to be a hell of a long episode again.
We've got to decide whether this is going to be one episode with both days or if we split it up into 2 episodes, because at this point it's going to be nearly a 2-hour episode if we do it as one. So there might just be a splash screen at the end of part 1 that goes, we decided to make this 2 parts.
Yeah, maybe. we will see.
We'll see. Depends how much editing time I have next week. I can try and do it as it's not even the editing, it's the subtitling. That's the big one. So we'll see how much brain space I have for subtitling next week.
If not, one next week, one maybe the week after.
Well, by the time you see this one, you'll know whether we did it as one episode or 2. You don't have to wonder. You'll know whether it was 1 or 2 episodes.
Oh, I'm so smart. SMRT smart.
No, I was the same. It took me too long to realize that was the case. Aravia, where can people find you on the internet if they want more of your stuff?
You can find me under Aravia, and if you're seeing this, no matter when you're seeing it, come to my YouTube channel. I don't know if it is out yet, but there will be a video where I take you with me for my 2 days of JConf, so you can in person see what is it about and why you should attend next year. So do that. Come to my YouTube, Aravia. Yes, wonderful. Laura, where can people find you?
People can find me at Laura K. Buzz pretty much everywhere. The big thing, you can go find a 20-minute video about my hands-on experience with the Switch 2 from an accessibility perspective. That's up on YouTube now at Laura K. Buzz. Other than that, thank you very much to everyone who came up to us at GA Conf to tell us that they listened to Control-Alt-Access. That was really cool. And we hope that everyone has a lovely rest of your week.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.